Ulysses S. Grant was a true hero of the American Civil War, and his strategy for it was legendary. But if you truly want to learn about his epic legacy, we first have to talk about his rise to power. Grant was born in 1822 within the great state of Ohio. He proceeded to become a West Point graduate and served in the Mexican-American War, where he was a second lieutenant, eventually promoted to a quartermaster. But after the war ended, he retired from the military forever, or so he thought, because in 1861 the American Civil War began, revamping his career in the military. Grant's first battle of the American Civil War was the Battle of Belmont, which would be the backbone for making Grant's Army of the Tennessee, so let's review it. The Battle of Belmont began on November 7th of 1861, but the first move of the battle was only a day prior on November 6th, when Grant moved by boat to the Confederate outpost of Belmont and surprise attacked it. Initially, Grant was winning, going as far as to scatter the enemy, but eventually the Confederate forces regrouped and were being reinforced by Columbus. No, not that Columbus. That Columbus. Eventually, Grant's forces were forced to retreat across the Missouri River, even though it was a relatively unimportant battle, with little going on elsewhere at a decent amount of coverage in the polls. In Grant's next battle, which was the Battle of Fort Henry, he landed north of the Tennessee River and planned an advance on the fort as it was simultaneously being attacked by Union gunboats led by a certain Andrew Holford. However, a combination of heavy rain, the poor sighting of the fort, and effective naval gunfire caused the Confederate army to surrender to foot before Grant and his forces arrived. Grant's next battle would be the Battle of Shiloh, where the Confederate army would make considerable gains on the first day with a surprise attack. However, one of the Confederate leaders of the army, named Albert Sidney Johnston, was mortally wounded, and through Grant's flexibility as a leader, his army survived. Afterward, the Union army conducted an unexpected surprise attack on the Confederate forces. This surprise attack reversed all gains made by the Confederates, and the Union forces actually pushed them farther than they started with. The Confederate army, now exhausted and defeated, were being pushed back farther and farther. Eventually, the Union army sent one last small pursuit and then stopped. Originally, the reaction to Grant's victory was happiness on the Union side, but then the casualty report came in, and everyone was shocked. That battle had been the bloodiest battle in the entire American Civil War, up to that point, and the Union side had lost more men than the Confederate side. Since we spent so much time talking about Grant's first few battles, we won't be able to talk about in as much detail his other battles. So if you notice that it's less detailed, it's just because I don't want this video's runtime to be 1 hour. In his next battle, Grant had to move his army 12 miles south overland to reach the Confederate Fort Donelson, where the battle would happen. Once he got there, Grant's first order of business was to probe Confederate army lines for the first 2 days, and he ordered Andrew Foote to attempt reducing the fort to rubble with gunfire, but Foote was forced to retreat after his fleet sustained heavy damage. The Confederate leader, knowing that the fort was surrounded, ordered a surprise attack against Grant's right flank. His intention for it was to open up an escape route to eventually retreat to Nashville, Tennessee. Originally, Grant, when the attack happened, was far from the battlefield, but when he finally arrived there, he made his presence known by rallying his men to counterattack. You see, there's something you gotta understand about Ulysses S. Grant. When he went into the heat of battle, that wasn't a one-off thing. That was his norm. Seeing their commander going into battle inspired his men. Basically, he commanded loyalty, giving him a lot of little advantages. He was bold, also giving him a lot of little advantages. That was his blueprint to success. Although the Confederates didn't manage to create the escape route they wanted, Grant's boldness spooked the commander Floyd, who lost his nerve, and they called off the attack. Eventually, the Confederate commanders Floyd and Pillow, no, not that Pillow, escaped with a small number of troops and relinquished command to Brigadier General Buckner, who accepted Grant's offer of unconditional surrender. And thus the battle was over, with a massive victory for Grant and the Union, gaining virtually all of Kentucky with most of Tennessee. Oh, and Grant got a cool nickname, which was Unconditional Surrender Grant. This next siege would be extremely important, as it was the last Confederate fortification on the Missouri River, and getting it would be vital to the war effort. So off Grant went to battle with Confederates. Grant launched 2 massive advances on the fort, but he was met by gigantic casualties with both attempts failing. So he resorted to a lengthy siege, and the Confederate fort was only able to hold out for 40 days before they finally gave in. This last stretch of the video will be exclusively about the Chattanooga campaign, which would be the last test before Grant was ready to fight against General Robert E. Lee, which I'm saving for part 2. Anyways, the reason I broke in like this is to hype up my other video when it's released. This is going to be a lot of information, so just stick with me for a moment. During the opening of the supply line, Cracker Line, a Union force in the city Chattanooga, whose commander Joseph Hooker, repelled a Confederate counterattack at Wauhatchie. The Army of the Cumberland moved to the strategic high ground around Chattanooga, while some of the Army of the Tennessee, under General Sherman, launched a surprise attack on the Confederate right flank. On November 24th, Sherman crossed the Great Tennessee River to occupy the high ground on the north end of the Missouri Ridge. That same day, 3 divisions under Joseph Hooker defeated the Confederates in a battle called the Battle of Lookout Mountain. With all that success, they started an offensive against the Confederates' left flank. And the next day, Sherman's attack on the Confederate right flank made very little progress, so Grant, hoping to direct the Confederate Braxton Bragg's attention away from that front to another. So Grant ordered Thomas's army to attack in the center of the Missionary Ridge, and their attack succeeded. Capturing these new entrenchments let Thomas's men surge up the Missionary Ridge, and with some help from Hooker, they routed the Confederate army. The Confederates, after this defeat, retreated to Dalton, Georgia, where they would successfully hold off the Union soldiers. Overall, though, Bragg's defeat eliminated the last stronghold over Tennessee and opened the door to Sherman's famous Atlanta campaign of 1864. It was also the last test for Grant before he would meet his most formidable foe, who was the greatest tactician America ever knew. His name was Robert E. Lee.